Hello, friends, and welcome to my library. So, I was born into a family that did not have a lot of money. As soon as I was born, I was introduced to books and reading through my parents and my grandparents and all of my family reading to me. One of my favorite books from this period in time is Where the Wild Things Are. This is one of my favorite books because it's one of my mom's favorite books, and she would read a whole bunch of these to me at night before I would go to bed, and this is what I started to cut my teeth on for literacy. I would try to sound the words out. I would go through a whole bunch of the pictures. I really liked Where the Wild Things Are because I personally think the art is gorgeous. So this is definitely what got me started on reading, was all of these. It got me interested in the stories. I was able to make little movies inside of my head. And it was just awesome because we did not have a TV back when we first had a house. So I went from that to this book, which was my absolute favorite book back when I was a child. Mainly because A, I love dinosaurs, and B, with this book, you are able to make different dinosaurs, and as you see, it has different versions or different pieces of the whole dinosaur name. So I started trying to sound these out, and this is how I branched from the picture books into the chapter books to really sound out words. But it's also what triggered my dad, who was not home often, to get the Hooked on Phonics program because he wanted to make sure I would have the best start when I started to read. And this was before kindergarten. So I would be able to go in and read while I was there. And I hated the Hooked on Phonics program. I love him to pieces, but if there was any way I could go back and have never done it, it was very frustrating for me. I personally did not try to make the words more difficult, but that's what ended up happening. And it's just a very dark memory for me, is sitting in his computer room fiddling with everything we had. So I went from those to reading little chapter books like The Secrets of Droon and The Magic Tree House. Now, Magic Tree House is they're still popular now today. But The Secrets of Droon were some of my favorites, mainly because I really liked the covers, but they had very interesting way of being able to go to Droon, which was the place. They would be able to go into the basement and kick a soccer ball to go to the next world. And I thought that was really cool because I kind of personally did not like where I was. I did not have many friends. I was always reading a book because I didn't have anybody to play with. I didn't like being outside that often, but I would go out and play. So I would always try to make up these little stories. And this is mainly these two books, but mainly the Droon books really got me into it. Because I was able to make up a story and pretend the characters were there with me, which is kind of how I started becoming more interested in reading, especially because it was kind of my own escape because we didn't have TV, so I wasn't able to hook myself into the TV. So I went straight from those to when I started elementary school, I would start reading the very first Harry Potter, which was actually part of a program in my school where I would be pulled out of my classroom and we would read these books. Now, I read this one and I read Aragon and Dragon Rider, and I would keep reading all these thick books. So this kind of left a bit of a negative impact on me because I kept thinking that the bigger the book, the more interesting it would be. So I would force myself to get through some of these really dry books that I just had no interest in just because I wanted to say, hey, I read this book that was bigger than my head. But Harry Potter is one I'm going to go back to because it kind of grew with me, but that's for later. So I went from Harry Potter to reading I got introduced to Paul Goble, who is still one of my favorite artists and book people for like the Plains folk tales, I actually started collecting his stuff. But Marguerite Henry, I was definitely a horse girl. I loved horses. I loved going through it. So Marguerite Henry had all these books that would follow the life of a horse, which I absolutely loved. So I went from that to reading, The Hobbit in middle school. Now, the Marguerite Henry books were also in middle school, but I went to, like, The Hobbit, which I actually think is honestly the best one out of the series, but that's just my opinion. And then, just random books that kept getting thicker and more interesting, but they always had to do with something that involved taking away from their current situation. So they would, like, leave their house, or they went to go on magical adventures. And then I got introduced to comic books, and manga, also in middle school. So these are, like, backwards comic books, which are still pretty cool now. So I was introduced to those. And then in high school, I started reading, The Lord of the Rings. And then that kind of jumped into all of these different books. But again, they all kind of have the same theme of fantasy, sci-fi, escaping from reality, being able to go do whatever they can so that they aren't who they are, so that they can feel important, which is definitely something that I've done. And I was actually inspired, so I'm currently I would like to try to write a novel by the time I am able, to be older. I can write a novel and have it published. But Harry Potter is one of the series that I absolutely love. It literally grew with me. My dad would actually go out every night that one of them were published let out to go and purchase all of these. So these are all from the bookstore immediately. And as they got bigger, he was always able to go do what he can. And then it just kind of, every time a new book came out, it was kind of another chapter in my own life. So that's one of the reasons why I really like the Harry Potters. And I'm still growing my book collection. Like, I've started collecting some of the nicer books. I've started collecting, just all of the books I can potentially use in the classroom. But my mom was a major factor in helping me, because eventually she would take me to, like, these book clubs. But yes, that is my library. I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a ring. Bye.